This week we're talking about one of Network's favorite topics, tax justice. So, Colin, who do you think pays more in taxes, you or, say, maybe Jeff Bezos?
I want to say that I probably do, because I feel like billionaires don't pay that much in taxes, actually.
You would be correct. Talking with Sarah Christopherson this week shed a whole new light on the tax system here in the United States.
Interesting. I feel like taxes is one of those topics that are like boring and dry and confusing to get into.
I think I would agree with you until I talked to Sarah, because she was able to just completely break it down in a light and use real simple terms that I was like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she said that that's really by design. And so often when we talk about taxes, even I think sometimes when we talk about it at Network, we use these big words and terms, and we make people feel like if you don't understand what we're saying, then, you just turn it off, that there's no need to pay attention. And that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
I think on top of that, too, just talking about money is something that makes people uncomfortable. So I'm glad that Sarah is, willing to really help us understand this mess of a system that we have that allows the wealthiest to get by without paying really much of anything at all.
Right. And she gets so kind of excited and energized talking about this, about talking about how if we really just had a just tax system here in the US, we could fund so many programs that will help the entire country.
Everyone paying their fair share in taxes seems like a simple concept to me.
Right. I mean, it should be a non-negotiable, but we know that people get a little prickly when we talk about it.
Definitely. Well, I'm excited to hear this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I hope you really kind of learn something new and pick up on some of the interesting facts that Sarah shares.
Let's dive in.
Today, we are excited to welcome back to Just Politics a friend of the podcast and a good friend of Network, Sarah Christopherson. Welcome.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here, although I wish it were slightly better times.
Agreed. So as we start, some of our listeners, some of our network advocates are familiar with you. You were on our first season of the podcast, and most recently you are on Nuns on the Bus and Friends on our second leg of the journey that took us from, I think, Pittsburgh to Milwaukee. So it was kind of the Midwest. But I'm wondering if you'd be able to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you're working on.
Sure. And let me just start by saying, 2024 was kind of a tough year for me, but my week and day, change on the bus was really the highlight of my 2024.
Oh, I love it.
I loved the network staff. I loved the speakers you guys pulled together, and I loved the enthusiasm and the passion and the dedication of all of the people who came out at every stop. It was phenomenal.
Oh, I think that it was the highlight of our year as well, being with everyone.
Thank you. So a little bit about me. I spent 10 years, the first 10 years of my career working on tax and budget issues, advising members of Congress. So I worked for Congress. And then I've spent the last 10 years outside as a policy advocacy advocate, working with Congress, trying to help them pass better laws. My specialties are tax, budget, and healthcare. So the big budget and tax and healthcare fights of the last few years, passing the Affordable Care Act, preventing Republicans from repealing the Affordable Care Act, the big tax deals that happened at the end of the Obama era, fighting the Trump tax law of 2017. So I am a lot of fun at parties.
And it's like every single thing that you focus on is like top of the line right now that we're looking at.
Yes, and on fire. So it's quite the time to be alive.
I can't even imagine. And I know, I've been at Network for 5 years now. And when I started Network, I knew nothing about the intricacies of the tax system here in the United States. I, knew the phrases of like tax the rich. I had heard it, but I didn't quite get what that meant. So as we dive into the conversation today, let's talk a little bit about numbers and what this all means. So we know that billionaires in the United States hold nearly $7 trillion in total wealth, which to me is unfathomable, astronomical. I can't even imagine what that would look like. And if you earned $100,000 per year, paid no taxes, and had no living expenses, so you were just keeping everything you earned, it would take you 10 years just to earn $1 million.
Right.
And
Right.
so over and over again. So it would take you 10,000 years to save $1 billion and 10 million years to save 1 trillion. So how have the wealthiest in our country gotten this wealthy?
Yeah. So let me start with where you started, which is coming to network and not having a great sense of the intricacies of the tax code. And I would say some of that is by design.
Oh,
There
yeah.
is really some intentionality around taxes are boring, taxes are complicated, you people in the public aren't smart enough to know taxes, which is, absolutely not true. So that you disengage and don't pay attention. And that lets the very wealthiest really rig the system, right? So one thing that I always do when I'm talking to groups, because I know I'm talking to people who are very smart, passionate, and very informed in their areas of expertise, but feel overwhelmed and intimidated sometimes talking or thinking about taxes. And what I always say is you can talk to your member of Congress and know some basic facts. You know that you're paying your taxes. You know from reporting that there are years in which Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, others paid $0 of federal income taxes. I had a conversation with a member of Congress 2 weeks ago, and I said, there were years where everyone in this room paid more than those billionaires. And he said, you mean a lower rate? And I said, no, I mean, we paid more in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are years in which those billionaires saw their income through wealth skyrocket and they paid nothing. So we may not all know the intricacies of tax. We may not know all the acronyms and this percentage of that percentage, but we all know that regular people are paying our fair share, that the people at the tippy top of the spectrum are getting away with, the equivalent of tax murder.
Yeah.
And that it's not right, and we can all, one thing I also want people to have some confidence in, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I'd like to lead with this, is don't ever let anyone tell you we do not have enough money to take care of the people in our country. We are phenomenally wealthy. So you mentioned the $7 trillion that billionaires have. And we're talking about like maybe 800 to 1,000 people. Figuring out exactly who's a billionaire is a little tricky, but let's say it's around 800 to 1,000 people. That's like your average high school gymnasium, right?
Right.
So we're not talking about a small town. We're not talking about a small city. We're talking about a high school gymnasium collectively worth $7 trillion when more than
Wow.
half of the country is not collectively worth $7 trillion. So when you think about what could we do if those billionaires were each left with just $1 billion? Like what if those poor, unfortunate billionaires only had $1 billion? And that left us with what? 7 trillion minus 800 billion. So, 6 trillion and change. Do you know what we could do with 6 trillion?
Right.
We would never have a hungry child in this country again. We would never have an unhoused person. We would never have kids who wanted to get an education and couldn't. We wouldn't have crushing debt. Like, it's mind-boggling. So when we think about the numbers that you mentioned, Eilish, we're talking about policy choices that we have made. We have made the choice to let someone like Elon Musk accumulate, hoard, if you will, more wealth than anyone in sort of like the history of civilization, at the same time that children are starving and that people are freezing on the streets. And, it's
That is unfathomable. When you compared it to the number to a high school gymnasium, I thought back. My high school, there were about 1,600 students in the school, so that is smaller than the entire student body of my high school.
Yep.
And that visual alone to me was so incredibly striking. And then to say to take it, so you think of like all the kids that were in the school district, and so it would be, probably 6,000 kids, and only 800 of them would have that extreme wealth.
Yep. And think about if you had one high school gymnasium that was worth $7 trillion, and you had, literally half the country. I mean, I'm not sure geographically where the dividing line is. So let's say it's like east of the Mississippi or something. It also had $7 trillion. That's not quite right. So, but imagine how much power any one of those people in the gymnasium has over every facet of our life, right? Like Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and when he decides that he doesn't like their editorials, he just takes over what they can say, right? When Elon Musk decides he doesn't like what people are saying on Twitter, he can just take over Twitter, right? Like we have given this gymnasium full of people incredible power to dictate what we know, what we eat, what we hear, what we see, the media we absorb, whether or not we can fight climate change. I mean, the list is phenomenal. And it's not based on these are the smartest people or, these are the most knowledgeable in their areas of expertise. It's just the sort of like we have decided to let wealth lead to more wealth.
Right.
And leave everybody else behind.
And I think what I'm seeing, across the country, but I drive back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Ohio on a very regular basis. And what I'm seeing, and I feel like they're two very different areas, is people are really waking up to the impact that the tax system, that the billionaires aren't paying their fair share, that, the everyday people are shouldering this and sinking. And even just this last week across the Pennsylvania Turnpike, there's a big sign. I just pulled it up on my phone, a billboard, and it says, "Help Pennsylvania, not billionaires." And I think of that kind of as we're pivoting, like kind of a rallying cry, that it's like the people saying, help us. We are the average person. We need these policies. We need this taxes to help us and not help the wealthiest get an absurd amount of money in their pockets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because I have done over the last 5 years a lot. Well, I haven't done the polling. I have been involved in polling. And I don't want the pollsters to hear this podcast and yell at them. I have worked with some amazing pollsters who did the polling. And it's exactly as you say, the message of tax the ultra wealthy, right? We see that resonate in Trump districts. We see that resonate in, like everybody from AOC's district all the way to the most hardcore, reddest conservative district you can think of. Because people know. They may not know all the details. They may not know all the hows and whys, but they know that the guys at the very, very top, and it is almost entirely guys, are rigging the system, right? Like you don't always have to know how the system is rigged to know that it is.
That it is. Exactly. And I think that's one of the ways we can help people get excited about that issue. And it's what you said at the start, like you don't need to know the intricacies and all the names of everything, but it's these basic facts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be really helpful for our listeners and for our advocates across the country as they grapple with understanding everything and then teaching and sharing the information with their friends and family. Okay, so now we've talked about, that how people are really going to be worse off because there aren't going to be these services or these programs. So This comes from Network's tax justice calculator, but I'm going to just go through a list one at a time. And I want you to tell me just like yes or no if there are things that we as a country could afford if we taxed billionaires
I'll just
at
tell
the
you
rate.
yes.
I know. Yeah, right. It's going to be the whole list. And I want people to say like, holy cow, like this is huge, this list. So, and we've talked about some of these already, but the child tax credit.
Absolutely. And can I just take 2 seconds to make a point, which I think you've probably heard me say before and ties into what we were talking about earlier. We saw what happened when we expanded the child tax credit, right? We saw how childhood poverty plunged. And then when Congress allowed that expansion to lapse, poverty rebounded right back up to where it was. And so when I say like childhood poverty is a choice that we have made
For the country,
there's
yeah.
there's no denying it. We know what works. We saw what happens, and we chose collectively to just not do it. Right?
Yeah.
Horrifying.
And I think that's why the child tax credit has been one of our huge issues at Network over the past few years. And one of the issues that our advocates across the country latch onto because they see the power of it in their own communities. They see what happened when we had it, when it was fully funded, and now where their communities are, where the kids are in their communities.
And can I actually say one more thing on this point, which is that there were a lot of people who benefited from the robust intervention that was a response to the pandemic. So even though the pandemic itself was, of course, a huge tragedy for millions of families, people benefited from the services they received. And when those services went away, whether it was the child tax credit lapsing or a host of other things that, Medicaid was more generous, there was a lot done to help people. When that went away, instead of people sort of looking at their individual members of Congress and saying, how did you vote? How did this affect me? Da, da, da. It was very easy to demagogue, one of the things that popped up after this support for some immigrant communities went away is, oh, well, it's the Haitians came in. I was doing okay. I was getting some support and benefits and help. And then, the Dominicans came in, the Haitians came in, and they stole it from me. And so you were seeing even immigrant families who'd come 10 years ago complaining about immigrant families that came 10 weeks ago. And instead of saying this is a policy choice that certain people made to benefit certain very wealthy donors, it became very easy to turn us against each other. And it's so depressing because it worked so incredibly well.
It's when we scapegoat any other group. And it's like, because of them, we don't have this.
Right. But it also goes to show how much people liked having those services, So the loss of them was devastating. And I think, frankly, brought us to this current political moment. But it also shows people really depended and needed that robust sort of partnership with the federal government.
Agreed. 100%. Okay, so our next one is universal basic income.
Yes, we could definitely do that. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head the way I do the CTC, but absolutely.
Absolutely. And you just talked about this kind of in conjunction with the CTC, but expanding Medicaid in states that have not yet expanded their provisions under the ACA.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would just like to point out that some of what we can't do this because it costs so much and you bleeding heart liberals are not realistic, save us so much money. Like a robust federal investment in Medicaid expansion across the board so that adults below a certain income threshold have access to healthcare. Like, that saves rural hospitals, that makes healthcare across the board more affordable. It means that you don't have long wait lines in ERs, right? Like, it's just the cost savings to us are phenomenal. So when people oppose something like a Medicaid expansion, it's not because they have like this hard-headed realism about costs and benefits. It's because some very powerful people benefit from the immiseration,
of
right,
of others.
of the working class. I mean, I know I'm sounding very Karl Marx here, but I've spent a lot of time looking at who benefits, and billionaires overwhelmingly benefit when people are too sick and too poor to fight for their rights, to fight for work protections, to fight for fair wages, to unionize, right? Like, there's a benefit to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos when everybody is sick and tired and working 4 jobs just to make ends meet and can't afford housing.
Yeah, it's the powerful and the rich get more powerful over the people. Okay, what about, so I'm going to lump some of these together. So Head Start programs or free childcare, but really just fully funding, better funding our schools and education in general.
Yes. And again, these are investments that pay for themselves, right? Like an educated workforce. Who doesn't want that? And I don't know all of the numbers for all of these programs off the top of my head, but what I do know is that the amount of income derived from wealth that goes entirely untaxed in this country dwarfs by a huge factor all of these social programs. I mean, in terms of how much money we give away to the ultra wealthy every year versus how little it costs comparatively to end child poverty or, take care of people. So the example that the numbers that I do have off the top of my head is we were fighting last year against a corporate tax cut that was part of a larger package that did kind of divide the community because there were some good things in the package. There were some really bad things in the package. But this one corporate tax cut in a package that included multiple corporate tax cuts on top of the corporate tax cuts that were passed and made permanent in 2017. So we're not talking about the entirety of corporate tax cuts. We're talking about a single flavor of corporate tax cuts. Cost the equivalent of universal pre-K for every child age 4 years old, plus 2 years of free community college. And you would still have change left over. So when we're talking about these social programs, we are talking about things that, okay, yes, $1 million or $1 billion sounds like a lot, but in comparison to how much we are throwing at corporations and billionaires, it's, it's like the cost of a social program is a grain of sand, and how much we're spending is, on billionaires is like a giant park sandbox, right?
I love that, because I think one of the things that I've realized with the work we're doing and with our tax justice calculator, so a shameless plug for our listeners to go to Network Lobby and look up our tax justice calculator, is that you can envision what your dream budget is if only the ultra wealthy would pay the fraction. Like how you can make sure that kids have food so they don't go to school hungry, or that schools can provide a free breakfast and lunch so that the kids can learn. And to me, that should be a non-negotiable. We want to make sure our kids have what they need. We want to make sure that we grow and we have an educated workforce, that we have people who are healthy enough to work in our country. I mean, this all should just be like, oh yes, of course we're going to fund these programs because it allows the whole country to grow and to get better.
Yep. And you've reminded me, actually, one thing I want to point out is anti-tax the anti-tax side, conservatives, the tax foundation, the Grover Norquist, no tax folks, they like to sort of play fast and loose with how they talk about these things. So sometimes you will see the tax foundation, which is a conservative, very conservative think tank, but that carries some credibility, which is sort of a source of frustration to me. But they will come out and say, well, the top 1% pays more in federal income taxes than da, da, da. So I want to clarify that there's a reason they talk about the top 1%, which is like people making, let's say, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's under $1 million. When you look at the top 1% and you include the car dealer who maybe makes $5 million a year, and Jeff Bezos, who has, $300 billion? I mean, it fluctuates. In the same average, right, you are really hiding where the money is and who's paying it. So the $5 million guy probably is paying a reasonable share of taxes, actually. Like, he can get away with some loopholes. And, I'm not crying for the guy with $5 million, but he still basically operates according to the same rules as the rest of us. He's still death and taxes, but he's still restrained by death and taxes. He's in our gravitational. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have managed to escape the bounds of Earth's gravity, literally and metaphorically, in that they really are not playing by the same rules. And so in some ways, I wish we would spend less time worrying about who's rich. Is it over $400,000, like Biden said? Is it the top 1%? And look at these people who have so much money that their super yacht needs its own yacht, which is literally a Jeff Bezos factoid that once I discovered that was so amazing, I couldn't let it go. When you look at how much the top, not the top 1%, not the top 0.1%, but like the top 0.01% pays, it falls off a cliff. Now, your listeners can't see me do this with my pencil, but imagine a line going up as the more income you have, the more taxes, federal income taxes you pay, till you reach a certain point of extreme excessive wealth. And then that number actually starts to plummet, right? So when you hear conservatives say, oh, well, the top 1% is paying da-da-da-da, they mean like, okay, the guy who still lives in your town
Mm-hmm.
and has a car dealership. They don't mean Jeff Bezos.
That is such a good point. So as we're kind of wrapping up the conversation, I wonder, do you think we'll ever see a tax system that is geared towards the working people, that's geared towards kind of all of us?
So, yes, partly because we know what to do, right? We know the loopholes that allow, I'm just going to say Jeff Bezos like 70 more times in the last 10 minutes of our conversation. We know the loopholes that allow these people, like the Michael Bloombergs and the Koch brothers and the Walton Walmart heirs. We know how they avoid paying taxes. And we know that they use regular people like family farmers as human shields, right? Like, you can't say estate tax in this political environment without every family farmer who is never in a million years going to pay the estate tax coming out of the woodwork to fight to kill the estate tax. So it's on the one hand, I'm sort of optimistic because, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, more and more people know that the system is rigged against them. And when we talk about policies like a wealth tax or like an income tax for billionaires, which are related but separate things, that polls really well. People want to see it. And they sure as hell don't want to see their Medicaid cut or services cut and to give Elon a bigger tax cut. But when you see how much power these people have accumulated with the wealth hoarding they have already done, and when you consider that we're basically on track to have trillionaires in the next, 2 decades or so, people who can single-handedly buy Supreme Court justices, people who can, I'm not sure that people know for instance, like that Neil Gorsuch is on the court entirely because of one billionaire in Colorado who funded every single step of his judicial career, including pushing him to the head of Trump's list with some very important donations and influence, right? Like, we know what to do. We know the people are with us. And we know that ultimately the ultra wealthy paying their fair share in taxes leads to more stability, more economic growth, better returns for everybody. But there is a group of billionaires who have hoarded wealth, consolidated power, and are thinking, frankly, very short term. I mean, so one of the groups that I work with that I absolutely adore is a group called Patriotic Millionaires. And they are millionaires and they are patriotic, but they're also smart enough to have some like self-preservation in the sense that they know. So they want to see their own taxes go up. They say, we are being taxed enough. We need policies that raise our taxes. And they're patriotic and they're altruistic, but they're also smart enough to know that if you have an increasingly bifurcated society between the extreme haves and the extreme have-nots being everybody else, that is not a stable political environment. That is an environment that leads to violence. That is an environment that leads to, because, you've taken away people's legitimate ability to affect change and you've left with nothing but extreme options. I wish that the broligarchs, if you will, at the very top were thinking a little more strategically and longer term.
Now, we've covered a lot of grounds. You've mentioned a couple different groups, including Patriotic Millionaires. But what resources would you recommend for our folks to seek out? Where could they go to learn more about all of this?
Yes. So I used to work for Americans for Tax Fairness. They're a great organization. Not to be confused with Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. This is a different ATF. They have lots of fact sheets. There's also a new group, Families Over Billionaires. And then there's a group that I work with sometimes called Tax the Greedy Billionaires, which, like the name suggests, is we really, really want to see those people at the tippy top that I mentioned, 50 million and above, right? Actually start paying taxes because they have the ability to do what the rest of us can't in terms of hoarding wealth, gaming the system, exerting completely disproportionate power over our political system.
So for all of our listeners, I think like myself, we're all moved to action. So I want to let everyone know that at Network, we will be working on issues around tax justice all year long. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Always love talking to you, learning more about everything that you're doing and how it impacts our country.
Thank you for having me, even though I'm not always coming with the most optimistic news.
It's okay. It's also what we need to hear all the time. So thank you. A huge thanks to Sarah for joining us again on Just Politics. I think back to hearing her speak on the bus, and every time she talks about taxes, my mind is blown. And I think about another way that my family or the people that I really care most about back home in Youngstown or Cleveland are so impacted by the billionaire tax break here in the U.S.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to someone like Sarah for being able to just demystify and lay out clearly what's going on. Because when you really take a look and you see how much, the game board is slanted, it blows your mind.
Right. I know. And even while I was talking with her, I was like continually writing myself notes and taking notes. And I was like, whoa, wait, you got to go back. I don't know explain that more. How is this even happening?
Yeah, no, incredible. And when I think of what's happening currently in Congress and the budget conversation around how we're going to be funding the country and the different priorities that we put ahead, it's hard not to just picture, their influence, kind of that shadow looming over a lot of the decisions that are going to be made that are going to affect a lot of us directly.
And back when we were starting our kind of Giving Up Billionaires campaign, I was talking to a friend of mine and she said, but really, Eilish, explain how you're telling me to give up billionaires. How are they even having an impact on this whole conversation around the budget. And I was like, because they're taking money away from all of our people, from our family members, from us, and they're giving it to them to the tune of $30,000+ in a tax break. And that's money that we're never going to see, that our communities are never going to see.
Yeah, you don't become a billionaire without taking out from someone else's pocket, really.
And, it's what Sarah said, that, these billionaires have more wealth, they have more money than they will ever be able to spend in their entire lifetime.
Yeah, that's a moral question in my mind of what we're willing to allow to continue to exist while there's so much need, while there's so much hunger, while there's so much just increase in prices and pressure that all of us are facing on a day to day.
Right. And that's, I think, Colin, why I'm so glad that here at Network right now we're really focusing on that with our budget work, with protecting SNAP and Medicaid, and making sure that our families, or the people around us, have what they need so that we have an economy for all.
Amen. So important to have these conversations. And I thank you and Sarah for really diving in and for opening this for us so we can each take action.
And, if you would like to learn more about budget reconciliation, about tax cuts, about what we really mean when we're saying we're giving up billionaires, make sure you visit our website at networklobby.org. Follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, or X. And make sure that you follow along with Just Politics. You can follow us on any streaming service where you listen to your podcasts.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next episode.
See you soon.